In the heart of Eastern Europe, during the final days of the Cold War, one country stood on the brink of collapse. Romania, once filled with hope after World War II, had become one of the most repressive places in Europe. Behind the scenes was one man, Nicolae Ceaușescu. For over 2 decades, he ruled with complete control. By 1989, the people had enough, and what followed became one of the most shocking endings to a dictatorship ever broadcast on live television. Nicolae Ceaușescu's journey to leadership started when he became the General Secretary of the Romanian Communist Party on March 22, 1965, after the death of Gheorghe Gheorghu Deș. He later took on the role of President of the State Council in 1967, consolidating his control over both the party and the government. Many Romanians were hopeful at first. Ceaușescu was seen as young, energetic, and possibly more moderate than his predecessor. Internationally, he made headlines in August 1968 when he denounced the Warsaw Pact invasion of Czechoslovakia during a public speech in Bucharest. This bold move earned him praise from countries like the United States, France, and West Germany. Western leaders began offering Romania better trade deals and loans, believing Ceaușescu was breaking from Moscow's influence. At home, this boost in foreign relations helped improve Romania's image. Ceaușescu used the movement to strengthen his grip. In 1966, he passed a strict decree banning abortion and contraception in an effort to increase the population. This policy was enforced harshly, with mandatory gynecological checks at workplaces and penalties for women who didn't comply. By 1971, Ceaușescu took inspiration from visits to China and North Korea, where he was impressed by the total control held by Mao Zedong and Kim Il-sung. After returning from Asia, he introduced the July Theses, a series of measures that increased censorship, centralized education, and tightened control over cultural expression. This marked the start of a more aggressive indoctrination. Elena Petrescu, Ceaușescu's wife, once just a chemist with little formal education, was promoted to high-ranking government roles. She joined the Central Committee in 1972 and started appearing regularly beside her husband at public events. Ceaușescu made sure the media portrayed both of them as Romania's saviors. School children were required to learn poems praising them. Streets and institutions were renamed in their honor. Loyalty to the Ceaușescu family became mandatory for survival in political life. By the end of the 60s, Ceaușescu had removed most rivals and surrounded himself with loyalists. He built a political system that depended entirely on his personal will. In the 1970s, Ceaușescu turned Romania into one of the most tightly controlled states in the Eastern Bloc. The key to this control was the Securitate, Romania's secret police. By 1977, the organization had over 11,000 full-time officers. But more dangerously, it had a network of over 400,000 informants in a country of only about 21 million people. Almost anyone could be watching: neighbors, co-workers, even family members. People began avoiding personal conversations altogether. Some wrote notes instead of speaking out loud at home, fearing their apartments were bugged. The Securitate didn't just spy, they intimidated. They detained people without trial, beat them, and used psychological torture. Dissidents, intellectuals, and students who criticized the regime were followed, interrogated, or disappeared. Phone calls were monitored, mail was opened, travel abroad was heavily restricted and usually only allowed for those considered politically clean. Even letters sent from relatives abroad were intercepted and copied. During this period, Ceaușescu passed cultural policies meant to isolate Romania from foreign influence. Western films were banned unless they had been heavily censored. The Beatles, Rolling Stones, and even classical Western composers were removed from public playlists. Libraries were purged of foreign literature. The education system was adjusted to emphasize communist ideology and glorify Ceaușescu's leadership. Religious institutions were closely monitored. Churches were torn down, especially in Bucharest, where entire neighborhoods were flattened to make room for new buildings. Clergy who didn't align with the regime were silenced or arrested. Religious education was discouraged, and children were taught atheism in school. Romanian media became nothing more than a propaganda tool. Television was reduced to just a few hours of programming per day, mostly speeches and state news. By the end of the 1970s, television was only available for 2 hours each evening, and nearly half of that was just Ceausescu talking. All newspapers were controlled by the state, and journalists were required to write only in praise of the regime. Ceausescu also launched a massive urban planning campaign called systematization. Under this policy, hundreds of villages were demolished or merged. In their place, concrete apartment blocks were built, cold, identical, and overcrowded. Residents were forced to move, often with no warning. Historical buildings, churches, and even cemeteries were bulldozed. The most extreme example of this planning was the People's Palace, or the Palace of the Parliament, which Ceausescu ordered built in 1977. Over 7 square kilometers of Bucharest's old neighborhoods were destroyed to make room. More than 40,000 people were displaced. The building was filled with marble, gold, and imported materials, while regular Romanians struggled to afford food. By the 1980s, Romania was carrying a massive foreign debt of over $10 billion, borrowed throughout the 1970s from Western countries and financial institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. Ceausescu had taken these loans to fund industrial expansion, build mega-projects, and buy modern machinery. But the global oil crisis, poor economic planning, and inefficient factories led to serious losses instead of profits. Ceausescu responded with the goal to pay off the entire debt as quickly as possible. In 1982, he announced a national policy to eliminate all foreign debt. The result was extreme austerity, imposed directly on the population. Most of the country's industrial and agricultural output was redirected for export, leaving almost nothing for domestic use. Supermarkets were mostly empty. Meat, eggs, sugar, and even flour were tightly rationed. Rural areas were especially affected. Many villages received weekly food deliveries that barely covered survival needs. Urban residents received ration cards, but those cards didn't guarantee anything. Often, people waited in line for 6 to 8 hours just to buy a few potatoes or some margarine, if anything was available at all. Ceausescu introduced strict limits on heating and electricity. From 1982 onward, household electricity was cut to just 1 or 2 hours a day, even in the middle of winter. Gas for cooking was also limited. Light bulbs were restricted to 40 watts, and elevators were shut down in most buildings. Indoor temperatures often dropped below freezing during winter months, especially in state housing blocks built with poor insulation. Hospitals faced shortages of basic medical equipment, syringes, and even clean bed sheets. Many surgeries were done without proper anesthesia. Malnutrition increased rapidly among children and pregnant women. Infant mortality rate rose dramatically. By 1985, Romania had one of the highest infant death rates in Europe. Ceausescu enforced new export quotas for agriculture, leading to severe food shortages in farming communities. Farmers had to meet strict government collection targets, and failing to do so could mean criminal charges. Crops were often taken directly from fields before they could be used locally. While the general population was suffering, the government elite continued living in comfort. Special stores supplied high-ranking officials with imported goods, luxury food, and modern appliances. Ceausescu and Elena lived in heavily guarded residences with full heating, fresh fruit, and meat flown in from abroad. By 1985, Romania had paid off over half its debt, but the price was human suffering on a massive scale. The country's infrastructure was breaking down, and its people were growing weaker, physically, mentally, and emotionally. Ceausescu refused to adjust his policies, convinced that sacrifice was necessary for what he called national independence. In truth, the nation was collapsing under his rule. The suffering was now becoming unbearable. Since public protests were dangerous, most criticism stayed private. Families spoke in whispers. Some even ran faucets while talking, hoping to block out potential listening devices. Suspicion was constant. To stay informed, many Romanians turned to illegal shortwave broadcasts from stations like Radio Free Europe, Voice of America, and BBC Romanian service. These stations aired news about world events, human rights abuses, and updates from Romanian exiles living abroad. Listening was risky. The Securitate could arrest anyone caught tuning in. But every night, thousands secretly listened, hoping to hear the truth. Underground resistance also grew. Students and intellectuals circulated samizdat, handwritten or typewritten materials that criticized the regime. Some managed to smuggle out photos of starving children, crumbling hospitals, and half-empty markets, which were later published in Western media. These images shocked the outside world and embarrassed the regime. Inside government circles, Elena's role kept expanding. By 1987, she had become deputy prime minister, held leadership positions in the Academy of Sciences, and was made a member of the Political Executive Committee. She was even given awards for scientific work she didn't write. Many of her academic degrees were fraudulent, but few dared question her. State media constantly referred to as the mother of the nation and scientist of world renown. In reality, she was deeply disliked by those who worked around her. She regularly humiliated staff members, silenced experts, and used her influence to control ministries she had no background in, especially in science, education, and culture. Her obsession with obedience pushed many skilled professionals out of government. The pressure exploded in November 1987 during the Brașov Rebellion. Workers from the Stagul Roșu truck factory and Tractorul plant walked out and marched to the Communist Party headquarters in the city. They tore down party posters, chanted slogans, and demanded food, heat, and better wages. Some even entered the offices and threw out portraits of Ceausescu. The government responded with force. Military units surrounded the city. Dozens of organizers were detained or interrogated. Many were later relocated to isolated areas of the country without trial. Families were harassed. Some lost their jobs permanently. But the regime avoided killing protesters this time, knowing the event had already drawn international attention. By December 1989, frustration across Romania had reached a dangerous level. The regime's control was still tight, but cracks had begun forming. The tipping point came in the city of Timișoara, a diverse western city close to Hungary and Serbia, where access to outside radio made it slightly more informed than other parts of the country. On December 15th, the Securitate attempted to evict Laszlo Tokes, an ethnic Hungarian pastor who had spoken out against religious repression and Ceausescu's dictatorship. Dozens of his parishioners formed a human chain outside the church to prevent the eviction. As word spread, crowds grew rapidly. Within hours, hundreds of people filled the streets. Many were not there for religious reasons, but because they saw a rare chance to express their own anger. By December 16th, the protests escalated. Demonstrators began chanting anti-government slogans that had not been heard openly in public in decades. Protesters broke into government buildings and clashed with security forces. The regime responded by declaring martial law and deploying the army, special police, and Securitate units. Ceausescu, who was out of the country visiting Iran on a state visit at the time, gave orders by phone to suppress the uprising with force. On December 17th, troops opened fire on unarmed civilians. Tanks were sent into city squares. Eyewitness accounts and later investigations confirmed that soldiers used live ammunition against men, women, and even children. Over the next 2 days, hospitals filled with the injured. Bodies were transported in military trucks and often buried in unmarked graves to hide the scale of violence. Some families were never told what happened to their loved ones. Estimates vary, but later reports from the Romanian Prosecutor's Office and human rights groups suggest that at least 93 people were killed in Timișoara alone by December 18th, with hundreds more injured or detained. Instead of silencing the rebellion, the brutality lit a fire across the country. Secret police lost control of the narrative. News of the massacre spread through handwritten notes, whispered conversations, and smuggled phone calls. People who had lived in fear for decades now saw the regime as beatable. On December 20th, Timișoara became the first city in Romania to openly declare itself free from communist rule. Workers went on strike. Factories stopped functioning. The local army garrison refused to continue attacking civilians. Back in Bucharest, Ceausescu was still trying to regain control. He called for a massive public rally in Palace Square on December 21st, hoping to show national unity and intimidate opposition. Tens of thousands were brought in by buses, many under threat of losing jobs if they didn't attend. As he began his speech, state television broadcast it live. For the first few minutes, the crowd appeared quiet. But then, something happened that had never occurred in public before. People began to boo. Then came chants. Confused and visibly shaken, Ceausescu froze mid-statement. His expression turned from confidence to panic. The TV broadcast was cut suddenly. Security forces tried to control the crowd with tear gas and gunfire, but chaos broke out. Protesters clashed with riot police in the city center. Fires were started, streets filled with smoke. That same night, demonstrations exploded across Bucharest and other cities. Students, workers, and ordinary citizens joined together, demanding an end to the dictatorship. By the early hours of December 22, 1989, the capital was in chaos when a dramatic shift took place. The Romanian army, which had been carrying out the regime's orders, suddenly turned against Ceausescu. Soldiers in full uniform marched alongside civilians, handing out bread and even joining chants for freedom. Many units had already defied orders the night before, refusing to fire on crowds. The turning point came with the shocking news that Defense Minister Vasile Milea was dead. The government claimed suicide, but many in the military believed he had been assassinated for disobeying Ceausescu's direct orders to use more force. Milea was a respected figure in the army, and his death caused an immediate collapse in loyalty to the regime. High-ranking officers began giving independent orders, pulling soldiers out of Bucharest and instructing them not to engage civilians. Ceausescu, now isolated inside the Central Committee building in central Bucharest, tried to deliver one last televised address at around 11 a.m., standing on a balcony with Elena beside him. But the crowd below drowned him out with angry shouts. Security forces could no longer contain the swelling crowd. Protesters forced their way inside the building, searching room by room. Shortly after 12 p.m., Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu were rushed to the roof where a helicopter was waiting. The aircraft, flown by Colonel Vasile Maluțan, took off under orders to fly the couple to a safe military base. But chaos on the ground made air control uncertain. Anti-aircraft batteries, unsure whether the helicopter was friendly or hostile, threatened to shoot it down. To avoid detection and possible attack, the pilot made a low-altitude flight path, dodging radar. During the flight, Ceausescu reportedly ordered the pilot to head for Snagov, or a military airbase, but airspace was not secure. After only about 15 minutes, the pilot, fearing both military retaliation and rebel forces, faked a mechanical failure and landed in a field near Titu, close to the city of Târgoviște, around 80 kilometers northwest of Bucharest. Once on the ground, the Ceausescus attempted to flee on foot. They flagged down a passing car and were driven to a local agricultural research station. There, workers recognized them and alerted local police. Instead of following old orders to protect the dictator, the officers chose to detain the couple. They were held in a military unit, Unit 01417, on the outskirts of Târgoviște. They were kept in an officer's room under constant guard, with the windows covered and contact with the outside world completely cut off. Food was limited to a few slices of bread, water, and sometimes tea. No one informed them of what was happening across the country. They were still wearing the same clothes from the day they fled Bucharest. Security around the building was tight. Soldiers at the base were unsure what to do next. The new provisional government, known as the National Salvation Front, was still forming in Bucharest. Inside that group, there was growing concern that any delay in dealing with the Ceausescus might lead to unrest, hostage situations, or even attempts to rescue them by loyalist forces. On the morning of December 25th, the decision was made. A special military tribunal was assembled at the barracks, led by Judge Gica Popa, with prosecutors and defense attorneys selected within hours. The trial was held in a small room inside the base with 5 judges, including 2 military officers, and a handful of armed guards present. A cameraman recorded the entire proceeding using a single video camera. The charges against the Ceaușescus included genocide for the deaths of over 60,000 people, though this number was later revised, undermining the national economy, abuse of state power, corruption, and destruction of public property. The evidence was thin and hastily prepared, but the outcome had already been determined before the session began. Ceaușescu refused to stand or acknowledge the authority of the court. He repeated several times that he was the legally elected president of Romania and insisted the trial was illegal. He accused the judges of staging a coup and shouted that only the Grand National Assembly could remove him from office. Elena joined in, calling the trial a betrayal and lashing out at the officers around her. Despite the outbursts, the tribunal moved quickly. Witnesses were not called. Evidence was not formally reviewed. The defense lawyers made only short remarks. In total, the trial lasted just 55 minutes. At the end, the judges delivered the sentence: death by firing squad. Immediately after the verdict, the couple was told they would be executed without delay. At approximately 2:45 p.m., the two were brought into the courtyard by armed guards and led to a wall already marked by previous gunfire from military drills. Both refused blindfolds. Nicolae remained defiant to the last moment, while Elena clung to him tightly. The execution squad consisted of 3 soldiers from the paratroopers regiment, including Captain Ionel Boeru, who later confirmed they were ordered to fire immediately after the command without waiting. Once the command was given, the soldiers opened fire with automatic rifles. They didn't wait for a final confirmation. The shooting lasted less than 30 seconds, but it left the bodies unrecognizable. Ceaușescu was hit by at least 70 bullets, and Elena by dozens more. The soldiers continued firing, even after the Ceaușescus had fallen, to ensure there was no possibility of survival. Their bodies laid motionless in the snow, twisted and soaked in blood. For several minutes, the courtyard was silent except for the wind. A military doctor quickly confirmed death. No religious ceremony was held. No family members were notified. Within hours, the corpses were placed in unmarked coffins and later transported to Bucharest Gencea Cemetery, where they were buried under heavy guard. Meanwhile, in Bucharest, engineers worked to edit the hastily recorded footage from the trial and execution. Around 10 p.m., Romanian state television, which had been taken over by the NSF, aired parts of the footage for the first time. It showed segments of the trial, the sentencing, and the final moments before the firing squad opened fire. The full execution footage, though recorded, was edited for television. By the next day, international networks, including BBC, CNN, ZDF, and TF1, were broadcasting the same footage. Across Europe, Asia, and the Americas, viewers watched the dramatic fall of one of the last remaining hardline communist rulers in Eastern Europe. In total, an estimated 300 million people saw parts of the video in the following 48 hours. Reactions were mixed. Many Romanians wept with relief. They had lived under the Ceaușescu's harsh rule for nearly a quarter century. To see it end was overwhelming. Some were shocked by the speed of justice and questioned whether a fair trial had taken place. Others believed the urgency was justified to prevent civil war or possible counterattacks from loyalist forces. In the days after the execution, Romania found itself in complete political freefall. The Romanian Communist Party disintegrated almost overnight. Party offices were abandoned, key figures were arrested, and others went into hiding. The entire state apparatus collapsed in just a matter of days. The vacuum was quickly filled by the NSF. Its leader, Ion Iliescu, had once been a senior figure in the Communist Party but had been sidelined by Ceaușescu in the 1970s. His sudden return to power stirred both hope and suspicion. Though Iliescu promised reform and democracy, Many Romanians feared it would simply be the same system with new faces. In the immediate aftermath, mass demonstrations continued. Protesters demanded full removal of remaining communist influences, fair elections, and accountability for the deaths in December. Dozens of investigations were launched to uncover what had happened during the uprising. Some military officers were tried for crimes committed during the protests, but many cases stalled or disappeared due to lack of evidence or political pressure. Romania's first free presidential and parliamentary elections were held on May 20, 1990. Ion Iliescu won the presidency with over 85% of the vote, though critics claimed the election was rushed and unfairly tilted in his favor. Tensions remained high. In June 1990, new protests in Bucharest's University Square were violently dispersed by miners called in from the Geo Valley, a move that shocked many who had hoped for real democracy. Meanwhile, the country was in economic disarray. Ceausescu had left behind a fragile industrial base, shortages of basic goods, and empty government reserves. Factories that once produced for export had no buyers. Inflation soared, unemployment rose sharply, and the value of the Romanian leu plummeted. Families searched for missing relatives lost during the December Revolution. Over 1,000 funerals took place in early 1990, many without full details of how the victims had died. Cemeteries in cities like Bucharest, Timișoara, and Cluj became daily scenes of mourning. More than 3 decades have passed since Ceausescu's fall, but the legacy of his dictatorship still shapes Romania. One of the most powerful symbols of his rule still stands in Bucharest, the People's Palace, now home to the Romanian Parliament. It remains the second largest administrative building in the world after the Pentagon. Every year on December 22nd, ceremonies are held across the country to honor those who died in the 1989 revolution. At Revolution Square in Bucharest, names are read aloud, candles are lit, and families gather. On December 25th, many Romanians still reflect quietly, not just on the execution itself, but on what led there.